I guess I did fire you and Jordan, and I told you, if you'd pay attention and you listened to me, I could get a show.
Tom Smith was the kind of man who could fill a silent room with laughter before he even said a word. His energy was contagious, his wit unmatched, and his ability to turn a pile of rusted metal into something extraordinary was almost magical. To the outside world, Tom was everything you could want in a reality TV star. Charming, funny, hard-working, and absolutely fearless when it came to chasing his passion for cars. But as with so many larger-than-life personalities, what the cameras captured was only a fraction of who he really was. Behind his jokes and infectious smile was a man who had fought through disappointment, heartbreak, and loss more times than most people could imagine. And as the world watched him rise to fame on Misfit Garage, no one could have predicted how quickly everything he'd worked for would start to unravel. Before Tom became a household name on the Discovery Channel, he was just a curious kid from Ohio who loved to figure out how things worked. He wasn't the kind of child who sat quietly and followed the rules. Instead, he was the one who took apart radios, lawnmowers, and engines just to see what made them tick. He didn't always manage to put them back together, but that didn't stop him from trying. That restless curiosity became the foundation of a lifelong obsession with machines. When his family moved to Georgia, Tom's fascination with cars only grew stronger. There, in his uncle's small garage, he found what would become his second home. The smell of oil, the hum of engines, and the sound of metal against metal were the background music of his childhood. Tom's uncle owned a 1974 Pontiac Granville, a car that, to young Tom, looked like pure freedom on four wheels. One day, curiosity got the better of him. Against his better judgment, he decided to take the car for a spin. He was only 10 years old, and though the thrill was unforgettable, it didn't end well. A police cruiser spotted the car, lights flashing, and in a moment of panic, Tom lost control and crashed right into the patrol car. It was a terrifying experience, but thankfully, no one was seriously hurt. When he got home, his uncle gave him an old-fashioned punishment he never forgot. Years later, Tom would laugh about it, saying it was one of the first times he learned how fast life can turn from fun to fear, a lesson that would echo throughout his career. By the time he reached his teenage years, Tom was already showing signs of the strong-willed personality that would define him. He wasn't content with just going through the motions. He questioned rules, challenged authority, and made decisions that often put him at odds with people who didn't understand his independent streak. But that same trait made him a natural problem solver, the kind of person who could look at a broken car and instantly imagine how to bring it back to life. After high school, Tom moved back to Ohio, where he opened his first small auto shop in one of the rougher parts of town. Surrounded by Chevy fans, Tom made a bold choice that said everything about him. He bought a Ford. When people asked why, he grinned and said, "I'm not going to ride over a cliff with you in a Chevy, so I bought a Ford." That line became one of his calling cards, a perfect reflection of the humor and stubborn pride that made him who he was. It wasn't long before Tom's raw talent caught the attention of others. One of his earliest and most influential mentors was Carl Parsons, a respected name in Ohio's racing circles. Carl saw something special in Tom, a spark of genius mixed with endless curiosity. Under Carl's guidance, Tom learned the finer points of building engines that weren't just powerful, but beautifully precise. To Tom, cars weren't just machines. They were living works of art. He loved the craftsmanship of the old days, the way an engine looked like sculpture, the way every bolt and wire told a story. He would later say that modern mechanics had lost some of that magic, because now even a simple brake job meant plugging into a computer. Back then, Tom once said, when you lifted the hood, it was like opening a piece of art. Life wasn't always kind to Tom, though. He moved around frequently, taking whatever work he could find to support his growing family. For a time, he even worked on television towers, climbing to dizzying heights in the freezing cold. But no matter what job he took, he always found himself drawn back to cars. That passion finally led him to Texas, a place that would change his life forever. There, he joined Driver's Edge, a shop where his creativity and craftsmanship flourished. For 4 years, he poured his heart into every project, building a reputation for making cars not just look incredible, but drive like dreams. At driver's edge, people began to notice that Tom wasn't like other mechanics. He didn't just fix cars, he transformed them. He pushed boundaries, took risks, and refused to settle for good enough. His dream cars, the 1964 Ford Thunderbolt and the 1965 Shelby Cobra, symbolized everything he believed in: speed, precision, and style that never went out of fashion. Tom wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing perfection. But fame found him anyway when his talents caught the eye of a fast-growing TV phenomenon. That opportunity came in the form of Fast and Loud, a Discovery Channel hit featuring the now iconic Gas Monkey Garage. When Tom Smith joined the crew, his sense of humor and sharp skill made him an instant favorite. Fans loved his witty one-liners, his chemistry with the team, and his ability to stay calm even when projects spiraled out of control. To millions of viewers, he was the guy who made cars fun again, a breath of fresh air in a world that often took itself too seriously. But behind the scenes, tensions were starting to build. Tom had always been a man of principle, someone who valued honesty and fairness above everything else. And in an environment fueled by tight deadlines, big personalities, and television drama, those values didn't always line up with how things worked. It all came to a head in 2014, when a simple misunderstanding changed his life overnight. The incident started with a Rolls-Royce owned by Gas Monkey founder Richard Rawlings. According to Tom, he and fellow mechanic Jordan Butler allowed a visitor to take a photo near the car, something they thought was harmless. But the shop manager didn't see it that way. A heated argument broke out, words were exchanged, and Tom, never one to bite his tongue, let his frustration show. Within days, both he and Jordan were fired. The news spread quickly, shocking fans who couldn't believe their favorite mechanics were suddenly gone. Richard Rawlings later told TMZ that Tom and Jordan were troublemakers who disrupted the shop's workflow. But Tom saw it differently. He believed it could have been handled privately without all the drama. Jordan later called it the only time in his life he had ever been fired, and said it felt deeply unfair. To both men, it was more than a job loss. It was a betrayal from a place they had given their hearts to. But Tom Smith wasn't someone who stayed down for long. The firing, though painful, became the start of something new, something bigger than anyone expected. Out of the ashes of Gas Monkey Garage came Misfit Garage, a spin-off show centered around the very mechanics who had been let go. Together with Jordan Butler, Thomas Weeks, and Scott McMillan, Tom helped launch Fired Up Garage, a name that perfectly captured the attitude of the group. They weren't just fixing cars anymore. They were rebuilding their reputations. Misfit Garage premiered on October 13, 2014, and quickly gained a loyal following. Produced by Pilgrim Studios, the show had a grittier, more rebellious energy than its predecessor. Fans loved the chemistry between the cast, especially Tom's unfiltered humor and creative genius. He brought the same spark that had made him a star, but now with a new sense of freedom. No bosses, no politics, just pure passion. Yet even in this new chapter, the shadows of his past lingered. Tom often spoke about his love for all kinds of cars, even though he was proudly a Ford guy. He admired the Chrysler Finns of the 1950s and 1960s, designed by the legendary Virgil Exner, and said those cars had lines that could make you fall in love. To Tom, design was emotion, and every car had a soul. Away from the cameras, he was also an artist in the truest sense. Friends would talk about how he filled their walls with intricate Sharpie drawings, some made with hundreds of markers. To him, art and mechanics came from the same place, a need to create something beautiful from nothing. But as the years went by, cracks began to form in the world he had built. The fame that once lifted him started to weigh heavily. Behind the scenes, the pressures of television, deadlines, and financial strain took their toll. He began to retreat from the spotlight, even as fans begged for his return. The same man who had once seemed unstoppable was now fighting battles few could see. And the tragedy of Tom Smith was only just beginning to unfold. As the cameras kept rolling and Misfit Garage found its rhythm, Tom Smith became the heart and soul of the show. Viewers tuned in not just to see the cars, but to hear his sharp wit, his stories, and his philosophy about life. He had a way of turning even the most stressful situation into a moment of laughter. When a car refused to cooperate, he'd joke that machines have bad days too, and somehow it always made the long hours worth it. But while his humor seemed effortless, those close to him knew it often masked deeper struggles, the kind that don't make it onto television. The pressure of constant filming, public scrutiny, and the unrelenting need to stay entertaining began to wear him down. He had built his life on resilience, but now it seemed that even his strength had its limits. The rivalry between Misfit Garage and Gas Monkey Garage became one of Discovery's favorite storylines. On screen, it looked like good-natured competition, but behind the scenes, the tension was real. For Tom, it wasn't just about ratings, it was personal. He had poured years of work and emotion into Gas Monkey, only to be dismissed in a moment of anger. The rivalry became symbolic of something much larger, a battle for respect and redemption. Tom never denied that he was outspoken, but he also never accepted being painted as a villain. He once said that television only shows 10% of the truth, and that most of what fans thought they knew about him was just the edited version of a much bigger story. Despite the drama, Misfit Garage had its glory days. The crew at Fired Up Garage built some incredible machines, and Tom's creativity shone through in every project. He was the kind of builder who could take a hopeless pile of parts and turn it into something that made jaws drop. He didn't care about perfection for the sake of ego. He cared about craftsmanship, about creating something that told a story. But television can be unforgiving, and over time, ratings began to slip. The show's unpredictable schedule and behind-the-scenes disagreements made it hard to sustain. Fans began to notice Tom appearing less frequently, and rumors started to circulate online. Some said he had left. Others claimed he'd been forced out. The truth, as always, was more complicated. After leaving Misfit Garage, Tom's life changed dramatically. Without the cameras, he returned to what he loved most, the quiet rhythm of the workshop. He worked on cars privately, often for friends or longtime clients, and tried to live a simpler life. Those who visited him during that time said he was still the same Tom, quick with a joke, generous with his time, and passionate about every detail. Yet there was also a weariness in his eyes, the kind that comes from years of fighting to prove yourself. The world knew him as a TV personality, but he saw himself as just a mechanic who happened to end up in front of a camera. Fame had never been his goal. It was just something that happened along the way. It was around this time that Tom began to open up more about his struggles. He talked about the toll that reality television had taken on him, the long hours, the public judgment, and the feeling of being misunderstood. He also spoke about his family, especially his children, and how much he wanted to be a better father and husband. Beneath the jokes and the sarcasm, Tom had always been a deeply emotional man, someone who cared more than he let on. He often said that his greatest satisfaction came not from seeing his name on TV, but from watching someone drive away happy in a car he'd restored with his own hands. But life after television wasn't easy. The industry that had once embraced him seemed to move on quickly, and Tom found himself struggling to adjust. Like many people who taste sudden fame, he faced the harsh reality of what happens when the spotlight fades. Opportunities became fewer, and financial pressures mounted. Yet even in those moments, he refused to give up. He continued working on projects, teaching others, and sharing his knowledge online. Fans who met him at car shows or local events always described him as humble and kind, the same man they had fallen in love with on Misfit Garage. There were also stories of Tom's generosity that rarely made the headlines. Friends recall how he would spend days helping someone fix a car they couldn't afford to repair, asking for nothing in return. He once told a fellow mechanic that the best part of his job was seeing something broken come back to life. Those words carried more meaning than he probably realized. They weren't just about cars, they were about people, about second chances, about the possibility of rebuilding no matter how bad things get. And in that sense, Tom Smith's story became a mirror for everyone who's ever fallen and tried to get back up again. As time passed, Misfit Garage slowly faded from the airwaves. Fans missed the humor, the chaos, and the raw authenticity that Tom brought to every episode. Online forums filled with questions. Where's Tom Smith? Is he still building cars? Will he ever return to TV? For a while, Tom remained quiet, focusing on his personal life and private projects. But every now and then, he would resurface in interviews or videos, still cracking jokes, still passionate about his craft. It was clear that even though he had stepped away from the spotlight, his love for cars, and the people who shared that passion, had never faded. Yet the heartbreaking truth about Tom Smith's story is that his journey was marked by both brilliance and pain. He was a man who gave everything he had to his craft, often at the expense of his own peace of mind. His career was built on hard work and rebellion, but it was also shaped by the very system that exploited that spirit for entertainment. Those who knew him best said he carried a quiet sadness, not regret, exactly, but a kind of grief for how things had turned out. He had been part of something special, something millions admired, and when it ended, it left a hole that nothing else could quite fill. Even in his final years, Tom remained active in the car community. He offered advice to young mechanics, spoke about the importance of integrity, and never stopped learning. He once said that cars don't lie. They tell you exactly what's wrong if you're willing to listen. Maybe that's why people felt so connected to him. He had a way of turning the mechanical into something human, finding life lessons hidden under hoods and behind steering wheels. His story wasn't just about horsepower and metal, it was about resilience, pride, and the pursuit of purpose. When the news of his passing reached fans, the reaction was overwhelming. Across social media, tributes poured in from around the world. Fellow builders, former castmates, and countless fans shared their memories, the jokes, the quotes, the moments that had made them laugh. For many, it felt like losing a friend. People didn't just remember the cars he built. They remembered the man who made them believe that anything broken could be fixed. And that was Tom's greatest legacy. In the end, the heartbreaking tragedy of Tom Smith wasn't simply that his career took a difficult turn, or that fame proved fleeting. It was that behind all the laughter and energy was a man who gave his heart to his passion and often paid the price for it. He faced failure, disappointment, and loss, but he never stopped being himself. His life was messy, unpredictable, and full of mistakes, but also full of beauty, creativity, and love. Tom once said that the most valuable thing a person can leave behind isn't money or fame, but stories. Stories that inspire others to take chances and keep going. And in that sense, he succeeded. Because long after the lights of Misfit Garage faded, Tom Smith's story continues to inspire anyone who's ever picked up a wrench, faced a setback, or dared to dream beyond their circumstances. He was proof that even misfits can make magic, that laughter can live beside pain, and that a true craftsman never really disappears. For all his flaws and struggles, Tom Smith left behind something real, the memory of a man who made people believe in second chances. His journey reminds us that greatness isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, wiping off the grease, and finding beauty in the rebuild. That was Tom Smith's art, his gift, and his tragedy. And that's why even now fans still remember him, not just as a mechanic or a television star, but as a man who turned broken things into something worth believing in.